Kathleen Nelson never thought of herself as beautiful. In Roswell, New Mexico Territory, 1885, beauty was measured in dainty waistlines and delicate features, neither of which Kathleen possessed. As she stood before the mirror in her modest bedroom, pinching the fabric of her dress between her fingers, she wondered if her size was truly the reason 7 suitors had turned their backs on her over the past 2 years. "You're being silly," she muttered to herself, trying to smooth the wrinkles from her navy blue dress. "There's more to life than marriage." But even as the words left her lips, she knew they weren't entirely true. In Roswell, an unmarried woman of 25 was already considered a spinster, left to face a future of loneliness and whispers. The sound of hoofbeats outside her window interrupted her thoughts. Kathleen peered through the curtains to see her father's wagon returning from town, dust billowing behind it. With a deep breath, she pinched her cheeks for color and headed downstairs to greet him. Henry Nelson had been both mother and father to Kathleen since her mother passed from the fever when Kathleen was just 16. Though his weathered face showed the strain of running their small ranch alone, his eyes still sparkled with affection when he saw his daughter. "There's my girl," he said, handing her a parcel. "The new fabric you wanted came in at Thornton's Mercantile." "Thank you, Papa," Kathleen replied, taking the brown paper package. "How was town?" Henry hesitated, and Kathleen knew immediately that he was holding something back. Her father had never been skilled at hiding his thoughts. "Out with it, Papa." "What happened?" Henry sighed, removing his hat and running a hand through his thinning gray hair. "I saw James Miller in town. He's engaged to Sophia Williams now." Kathleen's chest tightened. James had been suitor number 5. They'd shared several pleasant walks and conversations before he'd abruptly stopped calling on her 3 months prior. No explanation, just silence. "I see," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "They make a handsome couple." "Katie," her father started, using her childhood nickname. "It's fine, truly," she insisted. "I have far too much to do today to worry about James Miller. The garden needs tending, and I promised Mrs. Rodriguez I'd bring her some of my raspberry preserves for her son's birthday." Her father looked unconvinced, but nodded. "There's news of a cattle drive coming through next week. The Circle S Ranch is moving their herd north. I've arranged to sell them some hay for their journey." Kathleen nodded absently, her mind still on James and the 6 other men before him, who had shown interest only to eventually look at her with thinly veiled disappointment. First had been Thomas Green, the banker's son, who'd called twice before making excuses. Then came Frederick Watson, Deputy Samuel Parker, Edwin Clark, the schoolteacher, James Miller, William Porter, the blacksmith's apprentice, and finally, just last month, George Holden, who owned the town's only restaurant. Each time, the pattern was the same. Initial interest followed by awkward silences, avoided gazes, and eventually, complete withdrawal. Kathleen wasn't naive. She knew her fuller figure was likely the cause, though none had been cruel enough to say it to her face. The whispers around town said enough. "I'll start dinner," she said, forcing brightness into her voice as she headed toward the kitchen. "Those cattle hands will be hungry when they arrive." The following week brought the promised cattle drive to the edges of the Nelson property. Kathleen watched from the porch as a group of dusty cowboys drove a sea of longhorns across the distant plains. The afternoon sun was merciless, beating down on man and beast alike. "Miss Nelson," her father called, waving her over. "Come meet the trail boss." Kathleen smoothed her apron and walked toward the barn where several men had gathered. As she approached, she noticed one man standing slightly apart from the others. He was tall with broad shoulders and a strong jaw partially hidden beneath several days' worth of stubble. Unlike the others, who slouched with exhaustion, he stood straight, his posture conveying quiet authority. "This is my daughter, Kathleen," her father said. "Katie, this is Mr. Zachary Sutton, trail boss for the Circle S." The man tipped his hat, revealing eyes the color of a summer storm. "Madam," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the air between them. "Mr. Sutton," Kathleen replied with a nod, acutely aware of her appearance after a long day of chores. "I hope your journey has been uneventful so far." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "As uneventful as driving 2,000 head of cattle across the territory can be. Your father's hay will be much appreciated by our horses. "We've prepared dinner for your men," Kathleen said. "Nothing fancy, just stew, bread and coffee, but it's hot and there's plenty of it." "You're too kind, Miss Nelson," Zachary said. "My men haven't had a home-cooked meal since we left Texas 3 weeks ago." As the cowboys filed toward the house, Kathleen noticed how Zachary Sutton's gaze lingered on her a moment longer than necessary, not with the discomfort or disappointment she'd grown accustomed to seeing, but with genuine interest. The realization sent an unexpected flutter through her chest. The meal was a boisterous affair, with 12 hungry cowboys devouring every morsel Kathleen placed before them. They shared tales of the trail, exaggerated accounts of stampedes narrowly averted, and good-natured ribbing. Through it all, Zachary Sutton remained quieter than the others, observing more than participating, though his men clearly respected him. "Miss Nelson," one of the younger cowboys said between bites, "this is the finest stew I've had since leaving my mama's kitchen in San Antonio." Kathleen smiled, pleased. "Thank you, Mr. Davis. It's my mother's recipe." "Your mother taught you well," Zachary commented from the end of the table. "A woman with cooking skills like yours must have suitors lining up at the door." An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Kathleen felt her cheeks burn as her father cleared his throat awkwardly. "More coffee, gentlemen?" Henry asked, rising to retrieve the pot. Zachary's brow furrowed at the reaction, but before he could speak, one of his men changed the subject to their expected arrival time in Denver. Later, as Kathleen collected plates from the table, she found herself alone with Zachary Sutton in the kitchen. "I've offended you somehow," he said quietly, setting down a stack of dishes. "That wasn't my intention." Kathleen kept her eyes on her task. "You haven't offended me, Mr. Sutton. Your comment was meant as a compliment. Yet it caused discomfort." His directness was refreshing, if uncomfortable. "The men of Roswell don't share your appreciation for my skills," she said carefully. Understanding dawned in his eyes. "Then the men of Roswell are fools." The simple statement, delivered without a hint of mockery or pity, caught Kathleen off guard. She looked up to find his gaze steady on hers. "We'll be camped just beyond your north pasture for 2 days," he continued. "The herd needs rest before the mountain crossing. With your permission, I'd like to call on you tomorrow evening." Kathleen stared at him, certain she'd misheard. "Call on me?" "Yes, madam. Properly, with a shave and clean shirt." There was no mistaking the sincerity in his voice. "Why?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. Something flickered in Zachary's eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or concern. "Because I find you interesting, Miss Nelson, and in my experience, interesting people are worth getting to know better." Before she could respond, her father entered the kitchen and the moment passed. Zachary thanked them both for their hospitality and joined his men outside. Kathleen watched through the window as he mounted his horse, a magnificent chestnut gelding, and rode toward their camp, his straight back silhouetted against the setting sun. "He seems a decent sort," her father commented, standing beside her. "Yes," Kathleen agreed softly. "He does." True to his word, Zachary Sutton arrived at their door the following evening. Kathleen had spent the day alternating between anticipation and doubt, finally settling on a simple blue dress that brought out the color of her eyes. When she opened the door, she barely recognized the man before her. Gone was the dust-covered cowboy. In his place stood a clean-shaven gentleman in a pressed white shirt and dark vest. His hair, damp from a recent washing, curled slightly at his collar. Only his eyes remained unchanged still, that mesmerizing storm gray that seemed to see more than she wanted to reveal. "Miss Nelson," he said, removing his hat. "You look lovely this evening." Kathleen felt warmth creep up her neck. "Thank you, Mr. Sutton. Please come in. My father is in the parlor." The evening passed pleasantly, with conversation flowing easily among the three of them. Zachary spoke of his 10 years as a cowboy, working his way up from wrangler to trail boss. He shared stories of cattle drives from Texas to Montana, of blizzards and droughts, of the changing landscape of the West as railroads pushed ever further into once isolated territories. "The railroad will reach Roswell eventually," he noted. "It'll change everything." "For better or worse?" Henry asked. "Both, I imagine. Progress always exacts a price." As the evening wore on, Henry excused himself, claiming fatigue, but giving Kathleen a subtle wink as he left. Alone with Zachary, she suddenly felt nervous. "Your father is a good man," Zachary said, breaking the silence. "The best," she agreed. "He sacrificed much to keep our ranch running since my mother passed. And you've been his right hand." It wasn't a question. Kathleen nodded. "We manage well enough together. It's a small operation compared to the Circle S. But it's ours." "There's honor in that," Zachary said. "Building something, maintaining it through hardship, takes character. Is that what drives you, Mr. Sutton? Building something?" He considered her question, his expression thoughtful. For a long time, it was just about the next horizon, the next trail. But lately, he trailed off, his gaze moving to the window, where stars dotted the night sky. "Lately, I've been thinking about putting down roots somewhere, having something of my own." "What's changed?" Kathleen asked. Zachary looked back at her, his eyes searching hers. "A man reaches an age where endless wandering loses its appeal. 32 feels different from 22. "I imagine so," Kathleen smiled. "Though at 25, I've hardly done any wandering at all." "Never too late to start," he said, returning her smile. "Though some might argue there's just as much adventure in staying put and building something meaningful." The conversation continued until the mantel clock chimed 10, reminding them both of the late hour. Zachary rose to leave, thanking her for the evening. At the door, he paused. "The herd moves out tomorrow afternoon, but I'd like to see you again before we leave. Perhaps a ride in the morning? I could show you our camp." Kathleen hesitated only briefly. "I'd like that. I'll be by at 9, he said, placing his hat on his head. "Good night, Miss Nelson." "Good night, Mr. Sutton." As promised, Zachary arrived the next morning, leading a gentle mare alongside his chestnut gelding. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. Kathleen had dressed practically in a split riding skirt that had once belonged to her mother, modified to fit her fuller figure. "You ride well," Zachary observed, as they made their way across the pasture toward the cattle camp. "My father insisted I learn properly," she replied. "Said no daughter of his would perch sideways on a horse like some delicate flower." Zachary laughed, a rich sound that warmed her more than the morning sun. A wise man, there's nothing delicate about ranch life. They crested a small rise, and suddenly the cattle camp spread before them, 2,000 longhorns grazing peacefully while cowboys moved among them, checking for signs of illness or injury. Several chuck wagons were positioned near a makeshift corral, where spare horses milled about. "It's quite an operation," Kathleen said, impressed by the organization evident even in a temporary camp. "Organized chaos," Zachary replied. "Works best when everyone knows their role and trusts others to do theirs." As they rode into camp, several cowboys tipped their hats to Kathleen, their expressions curious but respectful. Zachary introduced her to the cook, an elderly man named Cookie, who'd been driving chuck wagons for 30 years. "Boss never brings visitors to camp," Cookie commented, giving Kathleen an appraising look. "You must be special, Miss Nelson." Before she could respond, a commotion near the herd drew their attention. A young cowboy was desperately trying to control a panicking steer that had somehow separated from the others. The animal's horn swung dangerously as it circled in confusion. "Stay here," Zachary instructed, spurring his gelding toward the chaos. Kathleen watched as he calmly approached the situation, shouting instructions to the other men. With practiced precision, they maneuvered the frightened animal back toward the herd, narrowly avoiding disaster. When Zachary returned, there was a thin sheen of sweat on his brow, but he seemed otherwise unruffled. "Just another day on the trail," he said with a small smile. "You make it look simple," Kathleen replied, "but I suspect it's anything but. Like most things worth doing." His gaze held hers. "Takes patience, understanding, and recognizing when to push and when to yield." They spent the morning touring the camp, with Zachary explaining the intricacies of moving such a large herd across difficult terrain. As noon approached, Cookie called everyone for the midday meal, a simple affair of beans, salt pork, and sourdough biscuits. "Not as fine as your stew," Cookie apologized to Kathleen, "but it keeps these boys moving." After eating, Zachary suggested they ride back, aware that his men needed to begin preparations for departure. As they approached the Nelson ranch, he slowed his horse. Miss Nelson Kathleen, he began, using her first name for the first time. I've enjoyed our time together more than I can properly express. As have I, she admitted, her heart beating faster at his earnest expression. The trail takes me to Denver, then back to the Circle S in Texas. It's a 3-month journey at best. He hesitated. I wonder if you might permit me to write to you while I'm away. Kathleen felt a mixture of joy and caution. She'd never received a courtship letter before, though several of her friends had boxes filled with them. I'd like that very much, Mr. Sutton. Zachary, please. He smiled. And when I return to Texas, with your permission, I'd like to make a detour to Roswell. I think that could be arranged, she said, returning his smile despite the voice in her head, warning her not to hope too much. Men had shown interest before, only to withdraw it once they'd spent time in town and heard the whispers or considered the prospect of a wife who didn't fit the delicate ideal. They parted at her door with a formal handshake that somehow felt more intimate than any touch Kathleen had experienced before. As she watched him ride away, her father joined her on the porch. He's a good man, Henry said, echoing Zachary's earlier assessment of him. Yes, she agreed, but he'll be gone for months, Papa, and men have changed their minds about me before. Henry placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Perhaps, but I've never seen a man look at you the way he does, like he's discovering something precious. The first letter arrived 3 weeks later, postmarked from Trinidad, Colorado. Zachary's handwriting was surprisingly neat for a cowboy, the words flowing across the page with the same easy confidence he displayed in person. Dear Kathleen, the herd moved slowly toward Denver. Our days measured in miles rather than hours. I find my thoughts often turning to Roswell, to your father's ranch, and most especially to you. Our conversations, brief though they were, left a lasting impression. You asked what had changed to make me consider settling down. I didn't answer fully then, not having the words. Perhaps it's simply that I've seen enough of the world to know that what matters isn't always over the next horizon. Sometimes it's right before you, if you're wise enough to recognize it. The men tease me for my distraction. Cookie claims I've let 3 steers wander off while daydreaming like a schoolboy. He exaggerates, of course, but not entirely without cause. I hope this letter finds you well. If you're willing, I'd very much like to continue our correspondence. Yours respectfully, Zachary Sutton. Kathleen read the letter 3 times before composing her reply, careful to balance warmth with propriety. Over the following months, their letters traveled between Roswell and various points along Zachary's journey, Denver, Pueblo, Amarillo, and finally the Circle S Ranch near San Antonio. With each exchange, Kathleen revealed more of herself, and Zachary did the same. She learned of his childhood in East Texas, the son of a farmer who lost everything in the war, how he'd taken to the trail at 16, working his way up through determination and an uncanny ability to read both cattle and men. He shared his dreams of someday having his own ranch, smaller than the Circle S, but his own land to work as he saw fit. In turn, she told him of her mother's illness and passing, of taking over the household at 16 while helping her father keep the ranch afloat. She wrote of her love for books, particularly the poetry of Elizabeth Barrett Browning, and her secret wish to someday see the ocean. What she didn't mention were her 7 failed courtships, the whispers that followed her in town, or her deepest fear that even Zachary's interest would wane once he returned and saw her through the lens of town gossip. In his final letter before departing Texas for the return journey to Roswell, Zachary wrote, I count the days until I see you again. 3 months of letters have only strengthened my conviction that our meeting was providential. I have much to say that paper cannot adequately convey, words that should be spoken face to face. Until then, I remain. Yours, Zachary. Those simple lines both thrilled and terrified Kathleen. What if the man who returned wasn't the same one who'd left? What if seeing her again disappointed him? What if the much to say was merely a polite goodbye? The date of his expected arrival came and went with no sign of Zachary. 1 day stretched to 3, then a week. Kathleen tried to hide her disappointment, throwing herself into ranch work with unusual vigor. The trail is unpredictable, her father reminded her. Any number of things could delay them. Of course, she agreed, though doubt had begun to creep in. Perhaps Zachary had reconsidered. Perhaps, like the others, he'd decided she wasn't what he wanted after all. On the 10th day after his expected arrival, Kathleen was hanging laundry when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Her heart leaped before she could temper her hope. Shielding her eyes against the sun, she saw a single rider approaching, not a cattle drive, just one man on a familiar chestnut gelding. Zachary dismounted before the horse had fully stopped, removing his hat as he strode toward her. He looked thinner than she remembered, his skin darkened by months in the sun, a new scar visible on his forearm. But his eyes were the same, those storm-gray eyes that seemed to see straight through to her soul. "Kathleen," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You're late, Mr. Sutton," she replied, trying for lightness despite the hammering of her heart. "Zachary," he corrected with a small smile. "And yes, I am. We had trouble at the Red River crossing, lost part of the herd and 2 good men." His expression darkened momentarily. "I sent the outfit ahead to the Circle S and came directly. I'm sorry for your losses," she said sincerely. "Thank you." He hesitated, then stepped closer. "Kathleen, these months away, the letters we've shared, they've meant everything to me." She held her breath, afraid to hope, yet unable to stop herself. "I'm not a man of fancy words," he continued, "but I know my own mind and heart. I came back to ask if you might consider a future together. Not immediately, I know proper courtship takes time, but I want you to know my intentions are serious." Kathleen felt tears prick at her eyes. "Zachary, there are things you don't know about me, about my history in Roswell." "Then tell me," he said simply. She took a deep breath. "I've been courted before, 7 times in fact. Each time, the man eventually lost interest." She couldn't meet his eyes. "People talk about my size, about how I'm not what a wife should be." Zachary was quiet for a long moment, long enough that Kathleen feared she'd said too much. When she finally looked up, his expression wasn't of pity or disappointment, but of barely controlled anger. "7 men," he said finally, his voice tight. "7 men looked at you, intelligent, kind, capable you, and walked away." She nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. "Then they left room for the right man," Zachary said, his anger melting into something softer, more determined. "If you'll have me, I aim to be that man, Kathleen Nelson. The people here—" "I don't give a damn what people say," he interrupted, then immediately apologized for his language. "What matters is what we think, what we feel. And what I feel for you is stronger than anything I've known." "You hardly know me," she whispered. "I know enough," he countered. "I know you're the first person I want to tell when something good happens, and the only one whose comfort I seek when things go wrong. I know your letters made the trail seem half as long and twice as bearable. I know that when I picture my future, you're in every part of it." Tears spilled freely down Kathleen's cheeks now. "I'm afraid," she admitted, "afraid that you'll change your mind, like the others." Zachary stepped forward, gently taking her hands in his. "I'm not them, Kathleen. I see you, all of you, and I think you're beautiful." The sincerity in his voice broke something loose inside her, a barrier of doubt she'd built over years of rejection. "I believe you," she said finally, squeezing his hands. "Heaven help me, I believe you." His smile was radiant. "Then may I court you properly, Miss Nelson? With your father's blessing, of course." "Yes," she said, returning his smile through her tears. "Yes, you may." Word spread quickly through Roswell about the handsome cowboy courting Kathleen Nelson. Eyebrows raised, whispers circulated, but Zachary remained oblivious, or perhaps simply unconcerned with town gossip. He'd taken a temporary position with a nearby ranch, allowing him to call on Kathleen several times each week. Their courtship followed all the proper conventions, chaperoned outings, proper distance maintained, formal permission sought from Henry Nelson, but beneath the propriety ran a current of deep connection that grew stronger with each meeting. 3 weeks after his return, Zachary escorted Kathleen to Roswell's autumn social at the town hall. It would be their first public appearance together, a fact that filled Kathleen with both excitement and dread. As they entered the brightly decorated hall, conversations faltered, heads turned, and curious gazes followed them. "Everyone's staring," Kathleen whispered, gripping Zachary's arm tighter. "Let them," he replied calmly. "They're just admiring how beautiful you look tonight." She'd worn her best dress for the occasion, a deep burgundy that complemented her auburn hair. Still, she knew the stares weren't admiration, but surprise, surprise that someone like Zachary Sutton would choose someone like her. As they moved through the crowd, they encountered several of Kathleen's former suitors. James Miller and his new fiancée, Sophia, nodded stiffly from across the room. William Porter, the blacksmith's apprentice, actually turned and walked in the opposite direction when he saw them approaching. "Am I missing something?" Zachary asked after the third such encounter. "Those were some of the men I told you about," Kathleen explained quietly. Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed by that same protective anger she'd seen when she first told him. Before he could respond, they were interrupted by Mrs. Thornton, the mercantile owner's wife, and Roswell's most notorious gossip. "Miss Nelson, how lovely to see you," Mrs. Thornton exclaimed with false cheer. Her gaze slid to Zachary, openly appraising. "And who might your handsome escort be?" "Mrs. Thornton, this is Mr. Zachary Sutton," Kathleen replied, maintaining her composure. "Mr. Sutton, Mrs. Eleanor Thornton." "A pleasure, madam," Zachary said, tipping his hat politely. "Mr. Sutton is new to our little community," Mrs. Thornton observed. "Passing through, are you?" "No, madam," he replied evenly. "I've taken a position at the Diamond Bee Ranch for now, but I'm looking at more permanent arrangements in the area." Mrs. Thornton's eyebrows rose. "Indeed! How interesting. And you and Miss Nelson are—" "Courting," Zachary stated firmly, placing his hand over Kathleen's where it rested on his arm. "With Mr. Nelson's full blessing." "How progressive of you," Mrs. Thornton said, her smile not reaching her eyes. "Kathleen has had such difficulty finding a suitable match. We were beginning to worry for her future prospects." Kathleen felt her cheeks burn with humiliation before she could formulate a response. Zachary spoke, his tone pleasant but with an undercurrent of steel. "I consider myself fortunate that the men of Roswell failed to recognize Miss Nelson's worth," he said. "Their oversight has become my greatest blessing." Mrs. Thornton's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. "Well, how refreshing to hear such unique sentiments. If you'll excuse me, I see Judge Williams has arrived." As she bustled away, Zachary turned to Kathleen. "Dance with me?" "After that display, everyone will definitely be watching," she warned, though her heart swelled at his defense. "Good," he said simply, leading her to the dance floor, where other couples were assembling for a waltz. As they moved together to the music, Kathleen gradually forgot about the watching eyes. Zachary was an unexpectedly graceful dancer, guiding her with the same quiet confidence he showed in everything. "Where did a cowboy learn to waltz?" she asked, genuinely curious. "My mother," he replied. "Before we lost the farm, she insisted her son would know how to conduct himself properly in any situation." His expression softened with memory. "She would have liked you very much." "Would have?" "She passed 10 years ago. Influenza." "I'm sorry," Kathleen said, understanding the loss all too well. "She was a woman who knew her own mind," Zachary continued. "Never concerned herself much with others' opinions. Rather like someone else I know." Kathleen raised an eyebrow. "Are you suggesting I'm stubborn, Mr. Sutton?" "I'm suggesting you're strong," he corrected, "and that's infinitely more valuable than being agreeable." As the evening progressed, Kathleen noticed a subtle shift in the room's atmosphere. Whether due to Zachary's obvious devotion or his unwavering confidence, the initial stares of disbelief gradually transformed into something closer to acceptance, perhaps even approval. Later, as they stood by the refreshment table, James Miller approached, his fiancée conspicuously absent. "Kathleen," he said awkwardly, "you look well." "Thank you, James," she replied, surprised by his approach. "May I introduce Mr. Zachary Sutton? Zachary, this is James Miller." The two men sized each other up, an unspoken tension hanging between them. "Miller," Zachary acknowledged with a nod. "Sutton." James cleared his throat. "I understand congratulations might be in order?" "We're courting," Kathleen clarified, uncomfortable with his presumption. "I see." James fidgeted with his vest buttons. "Well, I wish you both happiness." As he walked away, Zachary turned to Kathleen with a bemused expression. Was that an apology? As close as James Miller will ever come to one, she replied. The remainder of the evening passed pleasantly, with several of Kathleen's acquaintances making a point to introduce themselves to Zachary. By the time they left, something had shifted for Kathleen. For the first time in years, she'd attended a town function without feeling like an outsider. On the wagon ride home, Zachary was quieter than usual, seemingly lost in thought. As they approached the Nelson ranch, he finally spoke. "I've been thinking about what Mrs. Thornton said tonight." Kathleen tensed, waiting for the doubt she feared would eventually creep in. "About your difficulty finding a suitable match," he continued, his hands steady on the reins. "And it occurred to me that perhaps we've been approaching this backward." "What do you mean?" she asked, confused. He pulled the wagon to a stop outside her home, turning to face her in the moonlight. "The problem was never finding a suitable match for you, Kathleen. It was finding a man worthy of you." Her breath caught at the intensity in his eyes. "I'm not sure I qualify either," he admitted, "but I'd spend a lifetime trying to be worthy, if you'd let me." "Zachary," she whispered, unable to say more, past the emotion tightening her throat. "I know proper courtship should last longer," he said, taking her hands in his. "And if you need more time, I'll wait. But I know what I want, Kathleen. I want a life with you, a home, a family, all of it. I love you." 3 simple words that changed everything. Words she'd never expected to hear directed at her, at least not with such conviction. "I love you too," she replied, the admission both terrifying and liberating. Zachary's smile was brighter than the stars above them. "Then marry me. Not immediately, we can have a proper engagement if that's what you want. But say you'll be my wife." "Yes," Kathleen answered without hesitation. "Yes, I will." Henry Nelson was unsurprised by their announcement the following morning. "About time," was his only comment, though the moisture in his eyes belied his gruff exterior. They agreed on a Christmas wedding, giving them 2 months to prepare. Those 2 months brought significant changes. Zachary, with Henry's blessing, began building a small house on the eastern edge of the Nelson property. Close enough to help with both ranches, he explained, but far enough for privacy. With money saved from years on the trail, he purchased a small herd of cattle and 24 acres adjacent to the Nelson land. It wasn't the grand operation of the Circle S, but it was a start, something of his own to build upon. News of their engagement spread through Roswell with predictable results: surprise, disbelief, and no small amount of speculation about what Zachary Sutton could possibly see in Kathleen Nelson. But as the weeks passed and Zachary's devotion remained unwavering, the whispers gradually subsided, replaced by a reluctant acceptance. Kathleen found herself suddenly included in activities that had previously excluded her. Mrs. Rodriguez invited her to join the church quilting circle. The dressmaker, who had always seemed reluctant to work with her fuller figure, now offered enthusiastic suggestions for her wedding gown. Even Mrs. Thornton, ever sensitive to shifting social winds, began treating her with a new deference. "It's strange," Kathleen commented to Zachary as they inspected progress on their home one crisp November afternoon. "Suddenly, I'm acceptable to people who barely acknowledged me before." "People respect happiness," Zachary replied, helping her over a pile of lumber. "It makes them question their own assumptions." "Or perhaps they respect you," she suggested, "and I'm acceptable by association." He stopped, turning to face her with an unusually stern expression. "Don't do that, Kathleen." "Do what?" "Diminish yourself. You're not acceptable by association. You're extraordinary in your own right, always have been." His expression softened. "The only difference now is that you're beginning to believe it yourself. People respond to that confidence." She considered his words, recognizing their truth. She did feel different, stronger, more certain of herself. Zachary's love hadn't changed who she was, but it had helped her see herself more clearly, without the distorting lens of others' disapproval. "Besides," he added with a mischievous smile, "I'm just a dusty cowboy. If anything, your acceptance elevates me in this town's eyes." Kathleen laughed, the sound echoing through the half-built rooms that would soon be their home. "We elevate each other, then." "As it should be," he agreed, pulling her close for a kiss that left them both breathless. The wedding took place on Christmas Eve, with Reverend Thomas officiating in the small Roswell church. Despite the winter chill, the building was filled to capacity partly from genuine well-wishers, partly from those too curious to stay away. Kathleen wore a gown of ivory satin, specially designed to accentuate her natural curves rather than disguise them. As she walked down the aisle on her father's arm, she felt none of the self-consciousness that had plagued her for years. Instead, she saw only Zachary waiting at the altar, his eyes filled with such love that everything else faded to insignificance. Their vows were simple but heartfelt, promises to cherish and support each other through whatever life might bring. When Zachary slipped the gold band onto her finger, a band he'd saved 3 months' wages to purchase, Kathleen felt a certainty she'd never known before. The reception at the town hall was a joyous affair, with music, dancing, and more genuine good wishes than Kathleen had dared hope for. Even her former suitors offered congratulations, though some more grudgingly than others. As the evening drew to a close, Zachary led her away from the celebration, toward the wagon that would take them to their new home, now completed and waiting for its occupants. "Mrs. Sutton," he said, testing the name as he helped her into the wagon, "I think it suits you." "I'm growing rather fond of it myself," she replied with a smile. Their home, though modest, had been finished with careful attention to detail. A fire already blazed in the stone hearth, casting a warm glow over the main room. Dried flowers decorated the mantel, and a quilt Kathleen had made during their engagement was spread across their bed. "It's perfect," she whispered, taking in the space that was uniquely theirs. "Not quite yet," Zachary replied, "but it will be. We'll make it perfect together." That night, as snow began to fall outside their window, Kathleen discovered that love between a man and woman could be both tender and passionate, respectful and uninhibited. Zachary's hands, strong from years of ranch work, touched her with a reverence that banished any lingering doubts about her body. In his eyes, in his touch, she was beautiful, all of her, exactly as she was. Afterward, lying in his arms as the fire burned low, Kathleen marveled at how completely her life had changed in less than a year. From resigned spinster to beloved wife, from object of pity to partner in building a future. "What are you thinking about?" Zachary asked, his voice drowsy as he traced patterns on her bare shoulder. "How fortunate I am that 7 men were too blind to see what was right in front of them," she replied honestly. Zachary chuckled, pulling her closer. "Their loss, my immeasurable gain." As winter gave way to spring, the Sutton Ranch began to take shape. With Henry Nelson's help, they expanded their small herd and planted the first crops in fields that had lain fallow for years. The work was hard but satisfying, each day bringing visible progress toward the future they envisioned. Kathleen's position in Roswell shifted subtly but significantly, no longer the object of whispers and pity. She was now sought out for her knowledge of ranch management and her skill with accounts. When the banker's wife fell ill, it was Kathleen who organized the women of the church to provide meals and assistance. When a dispute arose over water rights between neighboring properties, both sides requested Zachary's mediation, valuing his fairness and practical wisdom. By summer, they had become fixtures in the community, their marriage a quiet testament to seeing beyond superficial judgments. The 7 men who had once courted and rejected Kathleen found themselves compared unfavorably to Zachary Sutton, whose devotion to his wife was obvious to anyone with eyes to see. In July, as they celebrated their half-year anniversary with a picnic by the creek that ran through their property, Kathleen shared news that would change their lives once more. "I visited Dr. Matthews yesterday," she said, watching Zachary's face carefully. "Are you unwell?" he asked immediately, concern evident in his expression. "Quite the opposite," she replied, unable to contain her smile any longer. "We're going to have a child, Zachary, in February." His expression transformed from concern to wonder in an instant. "A baby? We're having a baby?" Kathleen nodded, laughing as he swept her into an embrace that lifted her feet from the ground. "Put me down, you fool. I'm in a delicate condition," she teased. "You're incredible," he countered, setting her gently on her feet, but keeping her within the circle of his arms. A child, our child. The months of pregnancy brought a new closeness to their marriage. as Zachary fussed over Kathleen's health and comfort with an attention that was equal parts endearing and exasperating. He insisted on hiring additional help for the ranch, ensuring Kathleen could rest when needed, and spent evenings reading aloud from child care books ordered specially from Santa Fe. "You do realize people have been having babies without instruction manuals for thousands of years?" Kathleen pointed out one evening as he pored over a particularly detailed volume. "Those people weren't responsible for you and our child," he replied without looking up. "I intend to be prepared." His dedication extended to practical matters as well. By Christmas, he had converted their spare bedroom into a nursery, complete with a cradle he'd crafted himself from pine harvested on their land. "It's beautiful," Kathleen said, running her hand along the smooth wood. "Our child will be very fortunate." "Our child will be loved," Zachary corrected, placing his hand on her rounded belly. "Everything else is secondary. Winter in New Mexico could be harsh, with biting winds and occasional snowstorms that isolated ranches for days. February brought one such storm, howling across the plains just as Kathleen felt the first contractions. "It's too early," she insisted as Zachary helped her to bed. "Dr. Matthews said another week at least." "The baby has other ideas," Zachary replied, trying to mask his concern. "I'll send for the doctor and your father." But the storm made travel impossible, the roads buried under drifts that would challenge even the most determined rider. As night fell and Kathleen's labor intensified, it became clear they would face this challenge alone. "Zachary," Kathleen gasped between contractions, "you need to deliver this baby." The color drained from his face. "I can't. I don't know how. What if something goes wrong?" She gripped his hand with surprising strength. "Nothing will go wrong. Women have been doing this since Eve. I need you to be strong for us now." Drawing on reserves of courage he hadn't known he possessed, Zachary prepared as best he could. He boiled water, gathered clean linens, and positioned himself to help bring their child into the world. Hours passed in a blur of pain, determination, and whispered encouragement. Just before dawn, with the storm still raging outside, their son was born a robust boy with a head of dark hair and a cry that filled their small home with its force. "He's perfect," Zachary whispered in awe as he placed the swaddled infant in Kathleen's arms. "You're both perfect." Exhausted but radiant, Kathleen cradled their son against her chest. "What shall we call him?" They had discussed names but hadn't settled on one, wanting to meet their child before deciding. Now, looking at the tiny face already showing signs of his father's strong features, Kathleen knew. "Henry," she said, "after my father, Henry Zachary Sutton." "A good, strong name," Zachary agreed, his voice thick with emotion. "For a good, strong boy." 3 days later, when the roads finally cleared enough for travel, Dr. Matthews arrived to find mother and child in excellent health, thanks to Zachary's careful attention. Henry Nelson followed shortly after, his weather-beaten face softening at the sight of his grandson. "He has the Nelson chin," the older man observed gruffly, though his eyes shone with pride. "And the Sutton stubbornness," Kathleen added with a meaningful look at her husband. "He refused to wait for the doctor, just like his father refuses to wait for anything once he's made up his mind." "Some decisions don't require deliberation," Zachary defended himself, unable to tear his gaze from his son. "Some things you just know are right." Spring brought renewal to both the land and the Sutton household. Young Henry grew rapidly, his lusty cries and determined personality keeping his parents on their toes. Kathleen recovered her strength quickly, soon balancing motherhood with her contributions to the ranch work. Zachary expanded their cattle operation, purchasing additional breeding stock and hiring 2 full-time hands to help manage the growing herd. The house expanded as well, with a new wing added to accommodate their growing family and frequent visits from Grandfather Nelson. As summer approached, bringing with it the first anniversary of their wedding, Kathleen found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this point. One evening, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, she shared these thoughts with Zachary. "Do you ever wonder what might have happened if those 7 men hadn't rejected me?" she asked, Henry sleeping peacefully in her arms. Zachary considered the question seriously. I try not to dwell on what might have been, he said finally. But I'm grateful every day that they couldn't see past their own narrow expectations. Their blindness led you to me, and I can't regret that. Nor can I, she agreed, though I sometimes wonder about them. James seems happy enough with Sophia, but the others, they still seem to be searching. Perhaps they're looking for something they don't understand, Zachary suggested. So many men want a woman who fits some ideal they've constructed: delicate, deferential, decorative. They miss the richness of loving someone real, someone substantial in both body and spirit. Substantial, Kathleen repeated with a small smile. A diplomatic word for my size. A truthful word for your presence, he corrected. You fill a room, Kathleen, not because of your dimensions, but because of your strength, your intelligence, your compassion. That's what those men couldn't see, and what I recognized from the beginning. She leaned against his shoulder, Henry stirring slightly between them. For a man who claims not to have a way with words, you certainly know what to say to make me love you more. Just the truth as I see it, he replied, pressing a kiss to her forehead. As the years passed, the Sutton Ranch prospered, expanding to include not only cattle, but also horses specifically, the breeding and training of quality cow ponies that became sought after throughout the territory. Their family grew as well, with the addition of a daughter, Elizabeth Rose, 2 years after Henry's birth, and twin boys, William and Robert, 3 years later. Kathleen's body, already full-figured, carried the evidence of 4 children with pride, far from diminishing her in Zachary's eyes. Each change only deepened his appreciation for her strength and resilience. The 7 men who had once courted and rejected her followed various paths. James Miller and his wife eventually moved to California, seeking opportunities in the burgeoning fruit industry. William Porter, the blacksmith's apprentice, married a widow from Santa Fe and raised her 3 children as his own. George Holden expanded his restaurant into a hotel that became a popular stop for travelers between Santa Fe and El Paso. The others drifted in and out of Roswell over the years, their lives touching the Suttons only peripherally. Occasionally, one would observe the obvious happiness of the Sutton family, with a wistfulness that suggested recognition of an opportunity missed. Kathleen never took satisfaction in their regret. She had found too much joy in her life with Zachary to harbor resentment for past hurts. Instead, she channeled her energy into her family, her ranch, and increasingly into supporting other women who didn't fit society's narrow mold. She became known for hosting gatherings where women of all shapes, sizes, and circumstances found acceptance and encouragement. Many a young girl struggling with self-doubt found in Kathleen Sutton a model of confidence and purpose that transcended conventional standards of beauty. Zachary supported these efforts wholeheartedly, often inviting husbands and potential suitors to join the conversations. A man who can't see beyond surface appearances isn't worth your time, he would tell the young women plainly. Wait for one who recognizes your true value. By the time their eldest son Henry reached 18 in 1904, the world had changed significantly. The railroad had indeed come to Roswell, bringing with it increased commerce and population. The Wild West was gradually being tamed, though the spirit of independence and determination that had characterized the frontier days remained strong in the Sutton household. Henry followed in his father's footsteps, showing a natural aptitude for ranch management and horse training. Elizabeth, now 16, displayed her mother's sharp mind for business and numbers, keeping the ranch books with meticulous precision. The twins, at 13, were still finding their paths, though both showed promising skills with horses and cattle. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Zachary surprised Kathleen with a journey to California to finally see the ocean she'd dreamed of since childhood. Standing on the shore, watching the Pacific waves crash against the sand, she felt the culmination of a journey far greater than the miles they'd traveled from New Mexico. Was it worth the wait? Zachary asked, his arm around her waist. She looked up at him, at the face now lined with 20 years of laughter, worry, and joy shared together. His hair had silvered at the temples, matching the strands that had appeared in her own auburn locks, but his eyes remained the same, that stormy gray that had seen her truly from the very beginning. Everything has been worth the wait, she replied. Every rejection that led me to you, every challenge we faced together, every moment that brought us here. Zachary's smile, still capable of quickening her heartbeat after all these years, spread across his face. "Those 7 men did me the greatest favor of my life," he said. "They left room for the right man." "And I found him," Kathleen agreed, leaning into his embrace as they watched the sunset paint the ocean in colors more vivid than she had imagined possible. That night, in the privacy of their hotel room, their love found expression with the same tenderness and passion that had marked their wedding night 2 decades earlier. Time had changed their bodies, his shoulders bearing the strain of years of physical labor, her figure shaped by 4 pregnancies and the natural progression of age, but their desire for each other remained undiminished. "Do you ever regret it?" Kathleen asked as they lay together afterward, the sound of distant waves providing a gentle backdrop to their conversation. Choosing a woman others had rejected, building a life in Roswell instead of continuing on the trail? Zachary propped himself on one elbow, looking at her with an intensity that still had the power to take her breath away. "Kathleen Sutton, in 20 years of marriage, I have regretted many things: investments not made, horses not purchased at the right time, words spoken in anger during our few serious disagreements. But I have never, not for a single moment, regretted choosing you. You are the best decision I ever made." She believed him. After 20 years, thousands of shared days and nights, 4 children raised together, and countless challenges overcome side by side, she knew with absolute certainty that his love was as real and enduring as the land they had cultivated together. "When we return home," she said, tracing the line of his jaw with her fingertips, "I want to host a special dinner. For our family, yes, but also for some of the young women in town who remind me of myself at their age, the ones who don't quite fit in, who believe they're somehow less deserving of love because they don't match some arbitrary ideal." "A fine idea," Zachary agreed. "We'll make it a regular event, monthly perhaps." "You're a good man, Zachary Sutton." "I'm your man," he corrected. "That makes all the difference." Upon their return to Roswell, they implemented Kathleen's idea, hosting monthly dinners that soon became a cherished tradition in the community. Young women, and eventually young men too, found in the Sutton home a place where they were valued for their character, rather than their appearance, their intelligence rather than their conformity to social expectations. Over the following decade, as their children grew into adulthood and began families of their own, Kathleen and Zachary witnessed the ripple effects of their unconventional love story. Henry married the daughter of a neighboring rancher, a girl who shared his passion for horse breeding and training. Elizabeth, much to everyone's surprise, fell in love with and married a professor from the newly established Military Institute in Roswell, combining her business acumen with his academic pursuits to establish a successful publishing venture. The twins followed different paths, William joining the Army during the Great War, and returning with both honors and scars, while Robert discovered a talent for veterinary medicine that took him to study in Denver before returning to establish a practice serving the ranches around Roswell. Through it all, Kathleen and Zachary remained the steady center of an expanding family circle, their partnership a model of mutual respect and enduring love that influenced everyone around them. In 1926, as they approached their 40th wedding anniversary, health concerns finally convinced them to turn over the daily management of the ranch to Henry and his wife, though they remained actively involved in family decisions and community affairs. "Slowing down doesn't mean stopping," Zachary insisted, when Dr. Matthews suggested he reduce his physical labor after a heart scare. "Just means choosing our efforts more carefully." For Kathleen, those carefully chosen efforts increasingly focused on mentoring young women and supporting causes that promoted acceptance and equality. Her reputation had grown beyond Roswell, and she occasionally received letters from women in other towns who had heard of her work and sought advice or encouragement. "Who would have thought," she mused to Zachary one evening, as they sat on the porch of the home they had built together, now expanded and improved but still recognizably theirs, "that being rejected 7 times would lead to helping so many others avoid similar pain?" "You've always had a gift for turning difficulty into opportunity," he replied, his hand finding hers as naturally as breathing. "It's one of the countless reasons I love you." On the morning of their 40th anniversary, their children, grandchildren, and many members of the community gathered at the Sutton Ranch for a celebration that was part family reunion, part community festival. Tables laden with food stretched across the yard, Musicians played beneath a canopy of trees planted decades earlier, and 4 generations of Suttons mingled with neighbors and friends. As the afternoon sun began its descent, Henry called for everyone's attention, raising a glass toward his parents. 40 years ago, he began, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd, my father recognized what 7 other men had failed to see, that my mother was a woman of extraordinary value, worthy of extraordinary love. Their marriage has been a testament to seeing beyond surface appearances to the true heart of a person. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the gathering. But their legacy extends far beyond their marriage, Henry continued. Look around you. So many of us have learned from their example to value substance over appearance, character over convention, love over conformity. My siblings and I, our spouses and children, and countless others in this community have been shaped by the courage they showed in defying expectations and choosing each other. Kathleen felt tears welling in her eyes as she squeezed Zachary's hand. So today, Henry concluded, we celebrate not just 40 years of marriage, but 40 years of showing us all what love at its best can be: honest, accepting, enduring, and transformative. To my parents, Kathleen and Zachary Sutton. To Kathleen and Zachary, the crowd echoed, raising glasses in a toast that encompassed 4 decades of shared life. As the celebration continued around them, Zachary leaned close to whisper in Kathleen's ear, "He speaks well, our son." "He speaks truth," she replied softly, though he missed one important detail. "What's that?" "That I recognized you too," Kathleen said, meeting his gaze. "That day when you first came to our ranch with your cattle drive, I saw something in you that I'd never seen in those other men, a capacity to see me, truly see me. That recognition went both ways, Zachary. It always has." His eyes, still that same stormy gray, though now surrounded by deep lines earned through years of New Mexico, sun and wind, held the same warmth they had 40 years earlier when he'd first asked to call on her. "Lucky for me," he said with a smile that remained as captivating as ever. "Lucky for us both." As twilight descended and lanterns were lit across the yard, casting a golden glow over the celebration, Zachary led Kathleen to the center of a cleared space where others had begun to dance. Despite the arthritis that had begun to trouble his joints and the extra weight that made Kathleen's movements less agile than in her youth, they moved together with the practiced grace of partners who had spent a lifetime learning each other's rhythms. Around them, their family and community continued the celebration, but in that moment, it was just the two of them, a man and woman, who had recognized in each other something worth cherishing when others had seen only limitations. "Thank you," Zachary said simply as they swayed to the music. "For what?" Kathleen asked. "For believing me when I said those 7 men had left room for the right man," he replied. "For taking a chance on a dusty cowboy with nothing but dreams and determination. For 40 years of building something beautiful together. Thank you," she countered, "for seeing me when I had become invisible to myself. For loving all of me, not despite my size, but including it as part of the woman you chose. For showing our children, our grandchildren, and our community what love at its most genuine looks like." As the stars appeared above them, bright in the clear New Mexico sky, they continued their dance, their movements a physical manifestation of the harmony they had created, together a harmony built on mutual respect, unwavering support, and a love that had only deepened with each passing year. In the years that followed, as age gradually limited their activities but never diminished their connection, Kathleen and Zachary remained the heart of the extended Sutton family. Their 50th anniversary, celebrated in 1936 despite the hardships of the Great Depression affecting the nation, was marked by the publication of a small book of Kathleen's writings on acceptance and self-worth, compiled by Elizabeth and distributed to women's groups throughout the Southwest. When Zachary passed peacefully in his sleep in 1939, just shy of their 53rd anniversary, Kathleen faced her greatest loss with the strength and grace he had always admired in her. At his funeral, attended by hundreds from across the region, she stood tall and proud, her still imposing figure draped in black, her face reflecting both profound grief and abiding gratitude for the life they had shared. "My husband once told me that 7 men had left room for the right man," she said during the service, her voice steady despite her sorrow. What he gave me in 53 years of marriage was far more than those men could have imagined possible, a love that accepted me completely, a partnership of equals, and the confidence to become fully myself. His legacy lives on, not just in our children and grandchildren, but in every person who learned from his example that true love sees beyond surface appearances to the heart within. Kathleen lived another 5 years after Zachary's passing, continuing her work with young women and recording her memories of their life together for future generations. When she joined him in 1944, the Sutton Ranch had grown to encompass over 1,000 acres, managed by Henry and his sons, with the same principles of integrity and hard work that had guided its founders. The 7 men who had once rejected Kathleen Nelson had long since faded from significance in her story. What remained was the legacy of a woman who had found her value not in their approval, but in her own strength and in the love of a man wise enough to recognize it. In Roswell, New Mexico, where their story began, the Sutton name became synonymous with seeing beyond appearances to the true worth of a person, a fitting tribute to a love that had transformed not only 2 lives, but countless others touched by their example. Years later, when visitors to the Sutton Ranch would ask about the old photograph that hung in the main house, a wedding portrait showing a full-figured bride and her tall, lean groom looking at each other with unmistakable devotion, family members would smile and tell the story of Kathleen Nelson, rejected by 7 suitors, and Zachary Sutton, the cowboy who had said, "They left room for the right man." And in that simple statement, in that enduring love story, generations of Suttons and others found a powerful reminder that true beauty, true value, and true love transcend the narrow expectations of any time or place, a lesson as relevant in modern Roswell as it had been on that day in 1885 when a cattle drive first brought Zachary Sutton to the Nelson Ranch and forever changed the course of Kathleen Nelson's life.